All right, we can start sharing. So hello everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Hi guys. So my name is Bazad. I run a tour operation called Voyager Expeditions, and I started the company, and I'm just going to give you some context so you know where I'm coming from. I started the company as a way to use tourism as a tool, primarily for cultural conservation initially. It morphed into primarily environmental conservation when we started working initially in the Himalayas and eastern India and Sikkim, and eventually moved to Ladakh. The whole purpose of our company really is to utilize tourism as a tool. So we operate snow leopard tours across 4 countries, and we're continuously looking at other places to um, partner with communities and work with new communities. But we do that as a way to essentially use this as a vehicle to generate profit, which we then reinvest. We're sort of a hybrid model company. We have both a for-profit entity and a non-profit entity, and we contribute a significant amount of our profits annually back into our nonprofit. But what we've had a very long conversation about the pros and the cons of tourism versus community for the last hour and a half, but we never view either of these things in isolation. It's almost always a hybrid, non-binary thing. It's when we're discussing what we're doing on a larger scale, in terms of a large scale context, to bring in what's happening in China and what's happening in India and what's happening in Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan or Mongolia, wherever snow leopard tours take place. We see that each community has its own issues, has its own challenges, and there are multiple models to address what happens in these places. So what we do is we look at what the conservation needs are. First we see if tourism is even a potential in a place. If tourism is a potential in a place, we look at what the conservation challenges are. Once we understand what the conservation challenges are, and we generally do this through our other nonprofit partners like Koslab or Kuban or Mirzo. Once we understand what's happening in terms of the community, in terms of its pressures, in terms of what sort of livelihoods they have access to, we can better understand the dynamics that will lead to one or the other model. We do models which include homestays, very similar to what we just discussed on the Chinese model, on the Qinghai model. And then we do private camps, and then we do conservancies, which also are hunting concessions, and some months of the year. And each of these is very, very different. So when we look at it from an ecosystem perspective, we have realized that at the very base of all of these considerations, we have to consider regulation. The regulations can be just ground rules that are set by the community, ground rules that are set for the community in terms of their contribution to conservation. Like we saw a 45% donation that goes to the community fund in China, or if we look at Hemis National Park in Ladakh in India, we see that there are permit fees applied for every tourist that comes in that go into a community fund, which the community then decides on how to spend on solar power projects or satellite phone services or something along those lines. So when we look at each of these things across snow leopard landscapes, we realize that we can actually create tourism models that take into account multiple communities while only one community is hosting tourists. So when we look at these integrated models, we discuss with the community what sort of model would work best for them. Not, when we're talking about launching community-based conservation or community-based tourism models that are inherently using conservation as a tool, using tourism as a tool for conservation, we're assuming that all communities want to be in this entrepreneurial role. It is actually a very difficult thing to be able to both do what you're doing in these places, either animal husbandry or small scale subsistence agriculture, and to learn how to host tourists and to provide a good tourism experience. And so when you have all these varied things, it's not necessary that just because you launch a community-based tourism model or a conservation-based tourism model, you will have success. Especially with areas that are prime snow leopard habitat, that means the communities are relatively disconnected. They have fewer access to being able to deliver what might be considered a world-class product from the tourism industry side. When you think about it, snow leopard tours are competing with safaris in Africa, with safaris in India, with safaris in South America. And they're competing at a very high level against people who have been doing this for decades, and business models that have been operating in these ways for decades as well. So where I think tour operators come in is in this middle ground, which acts as a buffer between the community, between the tourists. So in a lot of the discussions we just had previously about the pros and cons of tourism versus community, many of these problems can be solved by an ethical tour operator in the middle. The right expectations, photographers who really want a picture need to be balanced or put in check by the tour operator. Communities that do not know how to engage or deal with tourists that are too demanding or are not too comfortable need to be able to hand that off to an experienced, basically, buffer in the middle that can help the communities cope with the tourists, help the tourists enjoy being in the community and being in these places. So this sort of expectation management comes also through regulation, through the issuance of permits, through creating a system that takes into account initially all of the problems that the community will face, the tourists will face, and the ecosystem will face. So, what we think of when we're looking at this from a livestock perspective is initially, what are the conservation objectives? Whose land is being used for the snow leopard tourism? How many communities are being engaged by it? What sort of conservation goals are going to be achieved? And when we're doing this, we're initially, for the majority of communities we work with, we look at some livelihoods that are using natural resource exploitation, such as animal husbandry, such as grazing, such as using pasture lands. These livelihoods can be replaced somewhat by tourism. And so if tourists are coming in, that means that herd sizes can go down. If herd sizes are going down, that means that it is easier to protect the smaller herds that are already there. If a plan is already decided upon on how cash is distributed amongst the community, or if a trust fund is created where all the cash goes in, once we realize what sort of numbers we're working with, we can understand how to better spend that money. So a lot of communities choose to start upgrading certain things, choose to create predator-proof corrals. They choose to have some scholarships or grants for some of the kids who are in the village who can go out and study, not necessarily study tourism or wildlife or anything connected to this, but just be able to get a better education. The thing we do when communities are not so entrepreneurially active, where communities want to take advantage of tourists coming in but don't know how to deal with the tourists, or will take a much longer time to learn certain things like hospitality or how an effective homestay is run. What we do instead is we camp on community land. And for a portion of the profits we generate separately from the communities. The communities are paid a fee that goes to the entire community, the whoever's given the land for camping, and then multiple people are employed from the community to operate the camps, to work as chefs, cooks, porters, guides, horsemen. There's a huge ecosystem around even bringing 1 or 2 people into a remote camp. And so when you have these connections built and you start generating profit from it, what we have done is we simply start upgrading everyone's corrals, especially in communities that are connected to our ecosystem but are not seeing tourists. Many of our guides come from far-flung communities that are within this network of valleys where we operate, but will never actually host tourists because they're just too far off the beaten path. But they are still integrated into the community as a whole. So they will work as guides, they will work as porters, they will work as horsemen. So you create these integrated communities that feed a central area which actually hosts the tourists. So tourists might never see 6, 7, 8 of the communities that they are actually supporting by their visit. And that's okay with the communities too, because the communities are seeing the cash. The communities know that this tourism is generating livelihoods for not just the one village that is hosting these tourists by either bringing them into their homes or by allowing people to camp on their land. It generates results very quickly in terms of the community itself realizing the potential of tourism, realizing the pitfalls of tourism. We rarely get the kind of tourist that puts a lot of pressure on us just because we set expectations really clearly, and we have contracts in place where essentially we want the community to continue to work on conservation. So we would much rather have tourists go back and leave or kick them off the tour if we feel their issues are violating our ethical terms or would violate the community's ethical terms. Because if it's a long-term partnership from a community's perspective or a tour operator's perspective, both of them need to work together. The tourist actually comes second. Because when you have a great partnership between the tour operator and the community, the tourism itself is going to continuously keep getting better. If you put the tourist first, it's not sustainable in the long term, because you're going to have a tourist for 1 week or 2 weeks, and that's not the relationship that matters. The relationship that matters is between me and the community, between the community and any tour operator. So it puts into perspective, thinking of these things long term. The things we also look at when, especially we do multi-country tours, we do multi-region tours, we do multiple reserves through a country. Each of these is important. It is basically spreading revenue across communities which might not see any. If we focus, it's very easy to spot snow leopards, very easy being a relative term. We might spot maybe 1 a week in Ladakh. During mating season, we might spot we've had as many as 14 sightings. But it primarily is because it has a highly developed guiding industry in the area. People who have been working as snow leopard trackers for close to 2 decades. And so they're able to find these cats, they're able to look for other animals, and when you have several tours camping in the same area, you automatically have several trained pairs of eyes looking for it. Now, you can be in other fantastic snow leopard habitats, but with just the community tracking for you, you may not be able to actually deliver on those snow leopards because you don't have the infrastructure in place. You don't have the trained eyes in place. So the model we're working with is to actually take some of our permanent on-staff trained trackers with us to multiple communities on these international trips. What that does is allows one professional tracker to be able to train communities as we basically switch camps multiple times. If say we're in Tajikistan, we use Tajik rangers, we use Tajik guides, but then we bring our own staff with. And so what that does is it introduces the community right away to what they know is a professional level of tracking and guiding. And this oftentimes allows those who are entrepreneurial, those who can become good guides, to realize that this is something they can continuously get better at. And so it does allow us to create itineraries that are multi-community engagement itineraries. You don't have to send all of your guests to just one place. And so the whole goal of this is to essentially create multiple markets for snow leopard tourism. There's no reason for snow leopard tourism to be concentrated in an area that has infrastructure, because if you look at it from a global perspective, 12 nations with snow leopards, especially giant nations such as China, and then having access to huge reserves in Central Asia, across India, across the Himalayas, you see that there aren't actually that many snow leopard tourists. There's only maybe 1,000 people who go on snow leopard tours through the world at the moment, and the majority of them are going to 3 places. So what can we do to actually take those 1,000 people and diversify them to different places? The thing to be done is actually not that complicated. Almost all areas that have snow leopards have nonprofits, have organizations that have worked with communities for a very long time. They have trusted relationships with these communities, and both parties already know that they can be relied upon. When you start a relationship on this basis, you already started with a long-standing basis in trust. And so if you're doing that, the tourist will always come second. Your conservation goals will be first. Your ability to look out for each other will be first. And your ability to deliver a great experience will come out of that. So it all comes down to having basically relationships in place that are based on regulation, that are based on understanding what the priorities are. If conservation is a priority, if keeping a very good relationship are a priority, then everything else falls into place. All right, that's my last slide. So the way we look at it in terms of scales is that you can have scale in one community, in one region, or you can have scale in one country. You can have a trip that is entirely community-based, no outside help, no tour operators in the middle, or you can have a trip which relies on maybe a Western tour operator and a local tour operator and the community. Or you can have, in the case of China, have foreign guides come in with their own clients, leading trips that are then entirely run by the community. So there's no one right way to do it. The way we do it is whatever is a priority for the community and whatever is a priority for the conservation needs in those areas. So the next session we have is supposed to cover a lot of examples on what has worked and what hasn't worked. We've gone through a lot of pros and cons tonight, where things like baiting were mentioned, things like capacities, carrying capacities were mentioned. And we've also discussed some of the other issues that come from having tourists into a place, such as loss of tradition, loss of heritage. And these are all things that we have considered and discussed and have found methods that work really well in combating them and in understanding how to pitch these to consumers. We find that the type of tourist that we get, at least, that really wants to see snow leopards are generally what we call the right kind of tourists. You know, people who are actually actively interested in being good travelers, in learning about the communities they visit, where the snow leopard is in the back of their mind, but you know, most of them have read the snow leopard and, you know, are in this frame of mind that they will most likely not see the cat, and they're visiting these absolutely amazing landscapes. You know, the mountains are beautiful, the communities are by and large all incredibly hospitable. There is generally abundant wildlife that is not a big cat, and all of that is put into context by great guides. So as soon as, you know, we have someone arrive in, say, in Leh, one of the first things I do is have this conversation with them about where they are, how it's connected to the Silk Road, where they are in terms of human history, and bring it all together with a deep connection to the community they're visiting, how their dollars are positively impacting snow leopard conservation, how they're impacting livelihoods, how they're impacting how these predators are perceived, and how they're impacting human wildlife conflict. And simply by being there, they are making a difference. So just on day one, they can, you know, go back home without seeing a snow leopard and they'll be totally happy. They'll recommend the trip to other people as well, because you are building this relationship with them, with the community, and helping them build a relationship to the community. So it's something that is eminently doable, but what it requires is an ethical tour operator that is the buffer between this. You know, it's I think improper to say community-based conservation and conservation-based tourism need to happen, and the communities need to do them, because there is a need, a critical need for professional tour operators to play their role. And communities can become these tour operators, but they do need someone to train them in that, you know. And so it's not the nonprofit's place or the NGO's place to first learn the basics of high-level tourism, or to be able to perform these roles at the same level as you know, game reserves in Africa or large safari operations in India. They need this information besides them, and they need someone who can implement it next to them as a partner. So you know, it's a complex web of relationships, of regulation, and of understanding how you can basically spread the market. And as, you know, participants in this, it's you know, we set what the market wants. It's not, the tourist doesn't set what the tourists want. The tourist buys things, and it is up to us to create that product that first meets our needs, and by our I mean the community's conservation, and you know, it needs to meet all these goals, and only then can it be considered a product. So, you know, tourists will buy whatever's on the market. If the most successful snow leopard tours are ethical snow leopard tours, then other snow leopard tours will be forced to copy that model. And, you know, that is what we have found to work well. Other people have to adapt, and especially if they're poor tour operators, if they're bad travel agents, if they're doing things the wrong way, it's actually easier to show a great model and to have communities say, hold on, we're not going to tolerate this. That model is way better than this. And so the economics work out eventually. You've heard a lot about this today, and so I'll end over here, but we have a lot of examples and things to share from our work, which we will do in the next few sessions, and we'll share what really works well and what really doesn't work well and what we've learned from that.
Thank you. Thank you, Behzad. That was really beautifully put, and putting it at the larger scale in terms of scale itself, geographically, but also different stakeholders involved. And just we're mindful of time. We actually had more planned, but we are, as Behzad said, it'd be great to take these into the next session when we talk about risks and talk about other opportunities from other examples off the range. But before we end, if everyone is okay, it would be great to just have any final comments from the floor. We've heard a lot about from our resource persons on different models of engaging communities in tourism. And I think some of the key principles that do emerge is about ensuring the entire community benefits, maintaining community cohesion, but not only within one community, but the whole landscape, and having supporting structures within the community, but with wider stakeholders involved to create ownership and deal with issues that do come up. But we wanted to just open it up to the floor if there were any last thoughts before we end today. Thanks to our resource persons for sharing so much today. I think we covered a lot. And there's so much more to share related to communities. But Ajay, do you have anything else to add? Now coming back at the end from where we set off?
No, I think this was a great discussion that everyone contributed to, so that's great. And just to reiterate, I think something that came up through everyone's points, that finding that conservation link is key to the effort. That's probably what sets this apart from what you would otherwise call conventional tourism or anything else. But it's been a great discussion, so thanks everyone.
Thanks, Ajay. And I see Terry, you've got your hand up. Go ahead. You are muted.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say thanks to Behzad, because I thought that was a really excellent and enlightening presentation for this group, especially having had the discussion that we had just before. And I think, you know, a key lesson is that all tour operators are not created equal, and that, you know, there are ethical operators out there who can operate in a way that's consistent with the community and conservation objectives. And I think that's really important to know, because I think certainly the experience that probably a lot of us have had is that that isn't necessarily always the case. So I think the way you described sort of leading the market rather than responding to it, you know, creating these things that tourists can buy is really, really important point. And I think by showing positive examples, you know, you can influence others and lead the whole industry in that direction. So yeah, I really applaud you for the way you do things, and I think it gives me a shot in the arm to hear that. You know, I feel really encouraged about snow leopard tourism going forward. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks.
My pleasure. It's a you know, I'll be brief. The people we work primarily with in Ladakh and Hemis National Park, there are these two wildlife guards, Kenrab and Smanla, and they are some of the best human beings I know, best friends of mine. And their whole careers for the last 20 years, they have been the only two wildlife guards. There's a third one, but they do most of the work. So it's, you know, 1,500 square miles of national park, and two people have been able to mobilize this continuous level of support through their learnings and through their continuous development. By basically working with scientists, with people like Rabuji or Yashji and others who have given them some ideas, and then the community has basically said, wow, that's a great idea. and the community has run with it. And what we do is we basically find really great ideas and we introduce other communities to them. And so when you have 50 ideas from 50 different communities and you're sharing them with multiple conservation focused communities, you get even more ideas and you get even more sharing, which is why I wanted to be a part of this, was because, where else do we get to engage about this in a way which covers all the pitfalls and all the positives. And so, whatever comes out of this will be an even better, more effective model. So it's super positive to be able to share that, but to also take those learnings back to these communities. Because, if it was possible, I'm sure all of them would join in on the Zoom call, but we can all be these messengers and sort of go back. So done for tonight.
Thanks, Bazad. Raghu, go for it. I see your hands up.
Just in a lighter sense. First of all, we need more of Bazad and we will have solved the problems. The thing is that the travel tour operators are in such a privileged position that they can drive what they want, because they got the market, and they could be, like tourism. Like I said, that as a driving engine for conservation, they are the people who can drive that very rapidly if they want to. But as we know from our experience, it's much easier to convince community rather than the tour operator community. We tend to go and work with community. But I think we need to not ignore this travel operators community and need to educate them. And if we can get more people converted like Bazad is, then our problem, our job will be much easier in saving our natural wildernesses.
Thanks, Raghu. We should have a whole session on tourism mobilization.